welcome to our Event Insider series. Thank you all for tuning in here today, and I'd like to introduce myself first to everyone here. So my name is Jocelyn. I'll be the host and the moderator for today, and I'm delighted to have everyone here and tuning in today's session. And in today's Event Insider panel discussion, we'll be discussing event gamification and how it could redefine our event engagement. So our guest panelists will be joining us in just a few moments here, and they'll be sharing and discussing some of their best practices and tips on implementing event gamification through their event planning. So stay tuned here so we can get started in our panel discussion, and we'll learn more about our highlighted speakers for today. Before we start the panel discussion, I am sharing my screen now to share the submitted responses, and here are some of the topics that we will go over with our guest speakers. So the first poll question we ask our participants is, what takeaways would you like to gain from this session? And as shown on the screen, here are some of the responses. So concrete examples of things we can do now: keep the game interesting and fair, new ideas to increase traffic in the vendor area, new ideas to increase engagement after the event, the gamification available in Whova and how they can be used for attendee networking, how to win over the skeptics. That's a great topic or thing that you would like to learn today. I want to feel more confident in what I'm doing with implementing gamification. I'd like to see how others use the gamification for their events and see how it can be applied to ours, how to implement gamification for future events, how to create the points earned implementation and create engagement, new ideas for gamification, how do we integrate other platforms and leverage technology for gamification, use case plus tips, increasing engagement after an event, and how to engage participants through games. So those are some of the responses that we see here for this first question. And the second poll question we ask is, have you implemented event gamification in your previous events? And as seen here on this graph, 75% of you said, yes, you have used event gamification in the past. So that's really great to hear. Some of you already have some experience and exposure to it, while 25% of our voters say they have not. So I want to thank those 25% of those attendees that are kind of here to tune in and learn all the great stuff that we'll have covered here today. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts for this poll question. And moving on to the third question we ask our audience is, what is the goal you plan to achieve with event gamification? And for this response, I know we have a different kind of mixed batch here, but I'll go over some of those responses here. So I'm going to go live. So those are just coming in here. So the main response that some of you are saying with 48% of the votes is to make my event more fun. 4% say that you want to increase session attendance. 24% of the votes say increase sponsor and exhibitor engagement. 20% say increase attendee networking opportunities. And 4% of the votes are coming in with other goals you plan to achieve with event gamification. So I want to thank everyone for chiming in here for this poll question. And finally, the last question we asked was, what type of event gamification have you implemented? And for this question, the bar chart here showcases some of our participants' responses, saying that the popular ones are leaderboard and scavenger hunt with 40% of the votes. Following that is the photo contest, which I hope the leaderboard and the photo contest are the features that are included on the Whova platform, on the Whova app. So and then following with that, tied with 25% of the votes, are trivia sessions, raffles that other event gamifications you've implemented through your events. And 50% of the votes say others. So thank you all for sharing. And for all those participants who took the time to submit their thoughts in today's polls, it's great to see all these responses. As again, like I mentioned before, we will be covering them with our guest speakers. If you're interested in viewing more content for event organizers, subscribe to our channel, where we will continue to upload interviews with top event professionals and new content on the latest event industry trends. With that all being said, it is now officially time to start our panel discussion and introduce our panelists for today. I'm just gonna start here with the first panelist, and I will introduce Earl Saline. Earl is the Director of Education educational programming for the National Ski Area Association. And while Earl will not be joining us for the live panel discussion, I did get the opportunity to meet and sit with him before today's session to ask him a few questions and for him to share some of his insight for today's topics. So we will start the interview in just a few moments here. And once we conclude our recorded interview with Earl, we will continue our live panel discussion with today's highlighted guest panelists. So we will be starting that recording in just a few moments here. All right, so Earl, thank you again for taking the time to sit with me to share your tips on how to redefine your event engagement with gamification. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insight. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into our interview with this first question. And so can you share some background information about your event?
Sure. Well, we are the Association for Ski Areas and the vendors that support ski areas in the industry across the U.S. And so we run a variety of events, and they range in size anywhere from 150 all the way up through 900 with our annual event. And those some include a trade show component, some don't. So when you add in exhibitors, we'll get anywhere from say 100 to 120 exhibitors as well. And then of those, there's maybe 20 to 30 sponsors, depending on the overall size of the event. And then for sessions, the education sessions, since these are our education conferences with a trade show component, education sessions will range anywhere from, say, 18 over the course of the event up through, say, 28 when you add in general sessions and keynotes and things like that.
Awesome. So it looks like it's a pretty extensive, complex events that you normally organize, but thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that information, Earl. And now that we got a little bit of some background and context about the events you run, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into the main topic for today's session, which is event gamification. So do you recall the first time you implemented some type of gamification in your events?
We actually started using Whova during the pandemic. And so it was new to us. It was virtual events were new to us as well. So being unsure, if you will, how successful these virtual conferences would be, we really tried to dive into some of the best practices that Whova was promoting and took advantage and tried some different gamification exercises with our attendees. Because our audience is used to the face-to-face, the in-person. They can walk down through the trade show hall and say hi to their friends. What we tried to do was get our ski area attendees to visit the virtual booths our sponsors or exhibitors had set up. So that's really where we started trying to use the gamification as a motivator to get our ski area attendees to visit with the sponsors and the exhibitors. We were definitely unsure how successful it was going to be. And I would say it was a little limited because it was new and different. So much of it was new and different to our attendees. But the transition back to in-person has helped with driving some of that gamification as well, and probably less complicated than what we tried during our virtual events.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. And sometimes, just we're so familiar with in-person events that sometimes that seems to implementing new ideas seems to be a little bit more easy just because it's, you're already used to knowing how to organize an in-person event, while like in virtual, it's much more complex. And maybe it was the first time during the pandemic that you're doing an online event for the first time. So I can understand how there might be a little bit more challenges there. But yeah, it's really great to hear, Earl. It's interesting how the pandemic definitely kind of shifted and kind of put you into a new perspective of event planning, even with gamification. So thank you so much for sharing on that. And then moving on here a little bit with just general questions about gamification. So what are some key considerations when designing gamification strategies now? Do you cater these to specific audience demographics as well, or is it just all across the board?
When we think about using Whova and the gamification tools within it, we don't necessarily segment between our ski area audience and our vendor audience. We try and get participation from both sides. When I mentioned we've maybe simplified how we approach the gamification side of it, we have really drilled down to maybe a couple of key things. One being using the leaderboard. That's an easy one for people to track as they engage with each other, as they engage through the app, as they engage with the event. That boosts their score on the leaderboard. So that's a natural driver right there. The other one that we probably come back to most consistently is photos. Using photos, trying to generate photos from our attendees. We've used a couple of different themes, if you will, things like, best view or best view from your office. I mean, our attendees work in some pretty spectacular places. So they have a lot of rich opportunities to take some pretty spectacular scenery shots or weather shots, things like that. So there's some natural interest in taking those pictures too and getting them to generate. So we reward and we'll pick a best photo, or the leaderboard also is an easy one for us to tag onto and recognize people through that.
Awesome. So it looks like you open up gamification just to like everyone from your audience and don't really have any like segmentation going on. But it's really great to hear that you're just kind of willing to award anyone that's participating in all these event gamifications. So that's kind of the main focus on your strategy.
It is. And we have our vendors, they're members of our organization as well. So what we have tried to do is, ski areas are maybe a primary audience for us, but those vendors are also important to us. And we have used the gamification to drive some of that interaction between the ski area and the vendors. Most of our shows are less buy-sell driven and more relationship driven. So that's really where we have tried to drive that interaction and add value, to be honest, for our exhibitors and sponsors that support our events. Because we used Whova during the pandemic, we no longer use an on-site brochure. Whova is really our event app from beginning to end. So there isn't that interaction through Whova, and the opportunity it presents is fantastic. There's some of that happens organically, but there's also increased opportunity for interaction through the app too.
Awesome. That's really great to hear, Earl. And so now that you kind of started to touch up a little bit of some gamification tactics, I kind of want to get into a little bit more details on that. And I wanted to ask you, can you list your top 3 favorite gamification ideas that are somewhat easy to implement or don't have really much of a time to kind of push out there and have your audience use?
Sure. I would go back to the photo ones. That's an easy one. And the thing we've found is that our attendees, because we've used the photo contest, if you will, on a somewhat regular basis, they're starting to post photos of their own, volition, if you will, well in advance of the events. So if we announce a theme, so maybe it's that best view, or, the view from your office, or we want to see the dogs of the ski area kind of a thing, they'll start to post those organically on their own before the event even starts. So that's one we go back to. It's relatively easy. It's a easy lift for them to participate, and it's an easy lift for us to go through, and we'll use the judging feature, the thumbs up, or I forget, favorites or likes, I guess, within the app. That makes it easy for us to see kind of who's got the most support from the attendees as well, let alone who our judging panel might pick too. That's probably the one we go back to time and again, that and the leaderboard, like I mentioned as well. So.
Awesome. And I know Hoover provides some of those great gamification ideas, but I also wanted to ask you, maybe kind of dive into some that maybe are not part of the event app. Do you include any other gamification strategies? I know like scavenger hunts are another great idea to do. So I just kind of wanted to follow up and see if you do other gamification ideas that maybe are not provided on the app.
We tried a few of those, and virtual was really the kickoff for us to try the gamification exercises. And again, it was to drive that interaction between attendee and exhibitor, as much as anything else. But I would say just the level of participation, the work that the attendees had to put into it, maybe limited some of the success. And then when you start thinking about the exhibitor or the sponsor, what they need to do. So I want to say we did something as simple as like a punch card type thing, right? Where, I visit Jocelyn's virtual booth. She gives me a sign off or a code that I have to keep, and then I turn that in. So just the complexity of it is where what we found was probably more than what we wanted to put into it. We want it to be easy. We want it to be relatively simple for both sides to participate in. So that's where we've really whittled it down and kind of settled on, okay, photos, leaderboard. That's kind of our shtick, if you will, now.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. So I do want to take this moment to give Earl a quick shout out and thank him again for his time and support in sharing some insights about event gamification. I hope you all had some great takeaways here on his discussion and interview I had with him. So with that being said, following our schedule, we'll now start our live panel discussion with today's highlighted guest speakers. So I do want to welcome first to our virtual stage is Amy Moore. Amy is the event manager for the Public Relations Society of America. Amy, it's great to have you here. Would you like to take a moment to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, my name is Amy Moore. Like Jocelyn said, I'm the events manager at PRSA. We are based in downtown Manhattan. I've been there almost 4 years. We do multiple events a year, some smaller ones, a large one. I have become the Whova go-to person at my organization. Anytime anyone has a question or trying to figure things out, I'm the it girl when it comes to that. We use Whova for all of our events now. We don't do anything manually or hard copy paper. So it's been a really great tool for us I feel like I'm repeating everything Earl said because we're kind of in the same boat. But it's now our go-to. And now our attendees are used to it. We just keep using it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Amy. I love that you are the Whova It Girl at your organization. That's really a great way to introduce yourself here with us in today's panel discussion. And our second panelist here on the stage is Jonathan Lopez. Jonathan is the Senior Manager of Operational Effectiveness at the Partnership for College Completion. Jonathan, happy to have you here today as well. Can you also take a moment to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thank you, Jocelyn. So I work for a nonprofit, as you mentioned, and we are going into our 4th year. We're a relatively young nonprofit. We're going into our 4th year of doing large events as part of our programming, convening about 25 universities across the states. So using Whova has been really helpful with organizing the events, keeping and increasing our engagement. And also being able to have some flexibility as things have changed with events, right? We started as a 1-day before COVID, went into like a 3-day virtual event during both years of COVID. And now we are a hybrid sort of model event that is like 2 days. We see about 400 to 600 people in each of those events. We do 2 of those per year. And so like Amy, also become the go-to person for Whova, and I'm currently training other people just because there's a lot to do in there. And I also want to share the joy of using it and making sure that other people also know how to use it because it is a great tool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and introducing yourself here, Jonathan. I love to see that our guest panelists for today are the main go-to person for Whova. So you definitely kind of already know a little bit of the gamification features that we offer. So I can't wait to hear a little bit more of what you guys have to share here with your insights for today's topic. So I know you guys already kind of covered a little bit about the type of events you organize, but I do want to go a little bit deeper with this first question and kind of ask you if you can share a little bit more background information of the events you run. So number of days of events, number of attendees, the type of attendees, how many event supporters you have, number number of sessions, all that kind of information. So Amy, I'm going to go ahead and start with you first if you'd like to share.
Sure. Our events, I do about 6 to 8 events a year. We use Whova for all of them. They range from a 2 to 3 day smaller conference for 150 people. There's a couple that are like 300 to 400 people, same kind of thing. 3 keynotes, 15 or so breakouts over those 2.5 days. We do have our signature conference. It's called Icon, where we have like 8 to 10 keynotes. We have 50 or so breakouts. We have like 20, 25 sponsors. That's another like 2.5 days, but that's sort of our signature event for the year. And we use Whova for all of our events. And there's no way I would ever do an event again without it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing us here a bit more of those events that you run, Amy. It's great to see how Whova is already like a staple within all the events and the number of events that you run throughout the year. So that's really great to hear. And then Jonathan, I'm going to go ahead and turn to you. Would you like to share a little bit more information about the events you organize?
Yes, I'll just add a little more info. So we do have about 400 to 600 attendees for 2 events, and these are 2 signature events that we have. We have about 2 keynotes per event, and we also have about 12 sessions for each of those per day. I think what's really different about our events, we call them summits or convenings, is that we have to engage leadership teams from 25 different universities to join these events. So a lot of work goes into it, finding our speakers, getting people registered for the event, and that happens for every event. Although most of them are returning attendees, we still have to do the work of engaging them and keeping them engaged before, during, and after. And both events are done through Whova.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I hope you have a lot of great tips to share a little bit about event gamification and keeping your consistent attendee audience engaged for each year's summit. So thank you so much for sharing here, Jonathan. So now that we have some good context of the events that you both run, I do want to move on to these next questions for our audience members who still have not tried gamification. So the first question I would like to ask you both is, do you think it's worth investing time and money into gamification to achieve, a specific event goal? So Jonathan, I want to hear your thoughts first.
Sure. Yes, it's definitely worth the investment. What I'll say is that I think in terms of investing money, it's really just my time, and that is money. But we plan our gamification within our engagement strategy. We do that once before we start sort of marketing the event. And so it feels like, from my perspective, a small investment that really pays off. And there's some really good dividends from investing time, planning it, setting it up, and then activating it during the event. We've seen some really great increase in our engagement due to these creative things that we've done. I'll also say that, I don't think the investment is that high. If you have time to set up an event, you really can build in a little bit of that time to do your gamification. And so I'm a big believer of it. And so I would recommend it for people that, have a chance to get into that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts here, Jonathan. It's great to hear. I hope that 25% of our poll responses who have not yet tried gamification are a little more inclined to start putting it into their event planning. And then, Amy, I'm going to turn to you. What do you think of investing time and money into gamification?
100%, no question about it. I feel bad because it's sort of easy for me. Our association, we're a member-based association of public relations and communications professionals. So our folks are, natural born extroverts. They are very into engaging. They are also very competitive. So it becomes, it sort of gives you bragging rights as far as, the leaderboard and who's where and, we kind of talk it up at our sessions. We'll give the attendees updates as to who's in the lead. So the investment, like Jonathan said, it's your time, but the outcome is worth it tenfold.
Awesome. Great to hear that there is a mutual consensus here about implementing event gamification through your events. So thank you, Amy, as well for sharing. And while we discuss the benefits of incorporating it into your event planning and the outcomes it has, sometimes during the event, it's easy for an organizer to get caught up with other event aspects, and attendee participation and engagement may become a second priority. So do you have any gamification strategies that are easy to pull off and are effective for attendees to participate for these event activities? So Amy, I'm going to come back to you for this question.
Yes, we have volunteers on an executive committee. So we get them started. They tend to start in the communities and start asking questions, start getting things out there. They start the ball rolling. So when I'm busy doing all the event logistics and all that kind of stuff, they help us get that moving, and then that sort of starts the ball rolling, and then they kind of keep an eye on it throughout. And like I said before, we'll make announcements from the stage, kind of get that competition going. So I don't have to, be tasked with that when, you're busy on site.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So making good use of your volunteers to get the ball rolling really is good to do to get it and manage to pulling it off. So thank you so much for sharing here, Amy. And then Jonathan, what about you? Do you have any suggestions for easy gamification strategies?
Yes, I think this is one thing that we consider when we started using Whova, and when we realized that gamification is here to stay. This is something that's going to keep, it started as a trend, and I think it's not here to stay. So we realized that we're a very small team, a very lean organization, and our resources are also very lean. So our strategy is to build our gamification into the features already available in Whova. So keeping it simple, keeping it relevant, and using what's already built in. That way, we don't have to do a lot of legwork. And so I think using, we can get into more specific later, but using the leaderboard has been, the biggest use of Whova for our gamification, and then keeping contests and games that are really simple, relevant. So the strategy is use what's already built into Whova, so you don't have to create new things. Repeat what's been used in previous years that worked well, and it really takes up very little of our time. We're at the point now after 4 years where we're only doing what has worked for us, and like Amy mentioned, it's become easy, right? We're just repeating the good stuff that we tried before that really worked for us. And so that will be my recommendation for somebody who's starting to get into gamification: keeping it relevant to your topic, to your audience, and to your attendees, and then use the built-in features and Whova so you don't have to create a lot of work for yourself.
Great. Thank you so much for those suggestions here, Jonathan. I really appreciate sharing those tips. And then, like you both mentioned, you're definitely using some of the gamification features on the Whova app. So photo contest is probably one that you already incorporate and are very familiar with. So I kind of want to follow up a little bit with that and kind of dive in to see if you have any photo contest ideas that you found successful for attendees to participate. So any photo contest themes that people really like to really engage and start sharing. So Amy, what are some of your ideas?
So I have different, they're called professional intersections. So a lot of my events are specifically siloed to a certain industry. So I have like a travel and tourism group. I have a health academy group. So so each time we do it sort of geared towards those specific groups. So for example, our travel and tourism group, one year we did your favorite vacation picture. One year we did, you had to be in the destination with something that you would know, like in Spokane, Washington, you need to, find something local that we would recognize to prove that you're there. So like there's a thing called the garbage goat. So like people took pictures next to the garbage goat, not only just doing pictures, but also, engaging some interaction. My health group, I think the pandemic was probably hardest on them. So most of them, if they weren't like in hospitals and clinics and that kind of stuff, they were working from home. So like Earl had said before, the best picture from your office, who's got the best view. So we try to make those pictures specific to either the destination, that group, the industry that they're in, just to, keep it so there's some consistency about what the pictures are.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing here, Amy. And then Jonathan, do you have any other photo contest ideas that you've implemented?
We've tried a couple of them, but I think what we learned very quickly is that, we have to be really mindful of our audience. So in our case, we work, like I mentioned, with leadership teams at universities. So that's, the cabinets, so president and VPs, etc. So unfortunately, they had to be a little more serious for us. And I do say unfortunately, because I have a lot of creative ideas for photo contests. It just wouldn't apply, or would it be appropriate for our specific audience? But that doesn't mean that whoever's, listening to this shouldn't get creative. We just have to tailor our photo contests to our audience. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to get team photo contests. So get your full team and upload your photo. And as Amy mentioned, built in the engagement part. So networking, get people to like your photo. And so the top 3 photos that are the most liked, they get a prize. And that price can vary, right? I think it's become sort of a staple with our events. And usually like a team photo with a president gets the most votes. So a lot of people are now really getting their university president to attend the event and to be there and to take the photo. So it's been really gratifying to see that people get invested in these things. I know it seems simple to get a team photo, but when you really think about it, getting somebody to like bring in a group of people from the place to work at and take a photo against the backdrop and then upload it, it takes some effort. So we do appreciate that that investment on their part. So this is why we have the prizes for the winners.
Awesome. It's really great to hear. I love both of your concepts and kind of how you modify them according to your event and audience. So thank you so much for both of you for sharing those ideas. And I know, Jonathan, you mentioned to keeping it appropriate. So I know sometimes event gamification can, stoke strong competition between attendees, and sometimes they can lose other, we can lose them in other aspects of the event, and kind of, might take, cross a little bit of that line of inappropriateness. But I do want to ask you, how do you balance the dynamic and immersive environment gamification can cause with your attendees while also keeping the event professional and educational? So Jonathan, what are your recommendations for that balance?
I think we're lucky in some ways because we're working with these very high level professionals, right? So they moderate themselves in many ways. But as I mentioned at the top of this thing, a lot of our gamification and content and use of Whova is really relevant to our topic. So what does that mean? We work with universities. So I'll give you a perfect example, right? So we do trivia cards or bingo cards that we use in person. We upload them into Whova for them to access. And they can either use that on their phone, their iPad, what we're calling out, whatever it is. But the trivia cards and the bingo cards are relevant to the universities. So information about like what's the biggest university, what's the oldest university, or who has the biggest enrollment, that kind of thing. And so it does like 2 things. It gets people interested to show that they know these things, and it also keeps it relevant. And so because it doesn't go into the fringes when it comes to creativity and what the games are, we always just stay within those parameters of professionalism. So our moderation is very minimum. But I will say that, that as event organizers and planners, it is part of our responsibility to moderate. So even though we have not very creative games and very relevant games to our topic and audience, I still build in time into my day to moderate what's going on with the photo contest and make sure that there's no comments that are getting outside of professionalism. So that will always be part of
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. So great tips on that. So keeping it relevant, making it fun. I love the trivia idea and concept. That's really great to hear about, like, making it relevant to what your event is, and then and keeping it balanced with moderation. So Amy, I also want to kind of ask you if you have anything to add for this question.
I'm very similar to Jonathan. My group, they're all PR professionals, so they know what bad PR is. So I tend to think they stay away from anything that could be slightly inappropriate. Again, the same, I do take a look, make sure everything is, on the up and up. But I would suggest for people that, aren't in the same boat as Jonathan and myself are, it's out there once you put it out there. So I think people tend to be not guarded, but just careful what they put out there. They don't really want to put something out there inappropriate because everyone's going to see it. I have my largest event's 2,000 people. You don't necessarily want 2,000 people to see you, say something on there that's inappropriate. So I think just that in itself is sort of a natural deterrent. But again, it's nice to have on the back end that option where you can take a photo down or you can take a comment away that isn't appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon, for that. So moderation is key. So I know Huva can offer our event organizers that tool to kind of keep, and remove any of those inappropriate comments or photos, stuff like that. So thank you so much, you both, for sharing a little bit about that. So I do want to turn topics here and shift on how gamification can foster attendee networking. And I know you kind of already started mentioning a little bit about that with like photo contests, getting people to like those photos, so campaigning for with other people they probably don't know. So I know many organizers want to facilitate this in their events. So do you have any recommendations for gamification and attendee networking going hand to hand? So Jonathan, I'm going to come back and start with you first.
Yep. So I think leaderboard engagement has been our biggest facilitator for networking. I think the biggest way to get points on the leaderboard is to do networking within the app. We always mention that to our attendees with our announcements, with our reminders, pop-up notifications. And they now know after 4 years that networking and meeting other people is the best way to drive up their numbers and the leaderboard engagement. It's very competitive for our events. People are like constantly upping themselves. And we've seen some really great stories from that. Like I've met people that do the same thing I do at 3 other universities through the networking. So we always point to the leaderboard. Like if you're networking with people, it's going to drive up the leaderboard and you'll win a good prize. Our prices are pretty good. We tried something else a couple of years ago, wasn't extremely successful just because of our audience, but a networking card game. So meet, like I said, 3 other people who do what you do at 3 different universities. So that was a lot of work for them. The engagement wasn't extremely high, about 20 to 50 people participated, but we just got incredible stories out of that. And it was easy to, and I would just put it into the community board and then people started going.
Great. Thank you for sharing that here, Jonathan. And then moving forward with this next question. So in anticipation for your upcoming events, do you have any pre-event gamification ideas to get attendees involved and excited before the event starts? So do you implement any pre-event gamifications? So Amy, I'm going to ask you and see if you have any ideas for that.
We go live with Huva to our attendees 2 weeks prior to our event. So that gets them in the app, gets them comfortable with it. And then that kind of starts that whole, again, I think the leaderboard is probably the best tool. It also facilitates people doing meetups on their own. So sometimes, in anticipation, all of our events are in person. So in anticipation of getting to our event, sometimes people come in early, so they get the opportunity to, hey, I'm in on Monday, anyone else here? Let's meet for dinner. So that kind of stuff, not necessarily gamification, but just the communication opportunities to get people in and, start talking to each other. But then that leads to the gamification naturally because they They now see it, they now know how to plan, what pictures they want to take, or what polls they want to answer in order to get their, points up on the leaderboard. So I do think like doing it, just opening the app in advance just kind of starts that whole process.
Well, thank you so much for sharing here, Amy. And then Jonathan, do you have any additional pre-event gamification ideas?
We have one, and this one it's so easy to do and honestly so fun for us. So like Amy, we opened our Whoova actually 2 months before the event to really drive up the registrations and attendance. And so we have 2 months to sort of engage people. The one that we do every year that has been really successful for us and it really has paid off in terms of engagement before the event is submit your icebreaker, a creative icebreaker. So we get tons of those. I mean, now we're in like the double-digit submission now. And the winner gets uploaded into Whoova for everybody to use as the icebreaker for the event. And obviously the winner, the one who submits the chosen icebreaker idea gets a prize. And so people have gotten really creative with those. I mean, we're not using those in all the events that we have, smaller ones. We use them for meetings here at the office. And some things that we never would have thought about, people are so creative and they want an opportunity to share that with the rest of.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of that new idea. I have never thought about that, letting your audience kind of curate and create an icebreaker. So thank you for sharing those little tips, Jonathan. And then I'm going to move on here to the next topic. And this is to discuss how using gamification to help accomplish some of your event goals. So my first question regarding about this topic is, how do you incorporate gamification to try and drive more booth traffic or interaction for your sponsors and exhibitors? Amy, I'm going to go ahead and turn to you for this question.
So this last year, we started using the passport contest, and that has really been helpful to get people physically to the booth to talk to the sponsors. Then the sponsors can scan their QR code. They love it because they get the leads. Our attendees love it because they get the engagement with the sponsor. We offer prizes for it, so you have to, if you visit all of the sponsor, exhibitor booths, then you get, into the pool for a prize. Prizes are incentive for anybody. They tend to, I mean, I think they will probably do it anyway, but the prize is just, an extra incentive. But we hadn't used it in the past, and this last year we did, and it was very well received.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that. And now that you have shared that this was your first time using, a feature like the passport contest to drive more booth traffic with event gamification, so it's really great to see that you're implementing these Whoova features. But I also want to kind of ask you as well, how did you incentivize your sponsors or exhibitors to participate in these activities, and how did you get them to incorporate the event gamification as well? So do you have any thoughts on that?
We don't have exhibitors or sponsors, but in some ways, if you're an event planner, you are the exhibitor and the sponsor. So there's some great things you can do to increase traffic to your table. I mean, we have a registration table. We invest heavily on fabulous swag every year. And so it's been an opportunity for us to connect with the attendees and meet people that we've never met before. And so I know swag might sound like something most people don't like to do, but we get things that are like really useful. Like people like a mouse, right? People will use a mouse, like a really fabulous one. And so it really does drive the traffic to that table, and it gives us an opportunity to meet people, point them to all the things for the event. So swag has changed also, right? Like, so it's always a good opportunity if you do have exhibitors and sponsors for them to promote who they are using swag. Just make sure that it is compelling, practical, and fabulous, And so I would share that tip with the attendees.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that, Jonathan. It's great to hear your perspective as well as Amy. And then for this next question, I want to ask you both if you have utilized any gamification ideas to motivate your attendees to share feedback, to complete session evaluations, surveys. I know collecting this information helps you make data-driven decisions. So Jonathan, do you want to share how you utilize gamification ideas?
Yes, I think this has been one of the biggest benefits of using Whova and gamification for us. So we really need the feedback from our attendees to drive our agenda for the next event or the next year. And we can't really do that without the feedback. So we had a problem in the first 2 years not having enough event survey responses. We were like the single digit responses, which is not good when you have 600 attendees. So we started a raffle for our surveys. So per university, for example. So if more people from your university enter, you'll have more entries to win our big prize. And so we've gone from having, like 5 responses to like in the 3 digits now. So we have real data now to make decisions about how we put up these events, how we plan them, and the actual content of it. And now we're making decisions based on that data. But I will also close this question with, we're able to really engage people with incentivizing their time. So if we're asking people to do a survey, it's an investment of their time, even if it's a few minutes. So I think a small incentive goes a long way to get.
Great. Thank you for that summary, Jonathan. That's really great to hear. So incentivizing people with, how they, compelling them to see like your time is valuable and what you have to say is valuable to us. So thank you for sharing about that. And then Amy, do you have anything to share for this question?
I'm lucky in the fact that when I start with my surveys and my feedback, because our association is public relations and communications professionals, they're communicators, so they tend to are willing to fill out surveys and give feedback. I find that when it starts to peter out, and if I still need more data to make better decisions, then we may do, hey, if you haven't filled it out yet, do it now, and then we'll put everyone in a raffle kind of thing. So we don't really incentivize it from the beginning, just because I feel like I'm spoiled with my with my audiences. But they do. But if it's not the level we want, then we'll offer some kind of incentive.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing there, Amy. It's great to see that you have a really great audience that is willing to kind of share feedback naturally. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your experience here. And moving on, as organizers, we normally run multiple day events and we strive to keep consistent attendance through through and throughout the event, particularly in the final moments of the event. So do you have any gamification recommendations to continue to get consistent attendance with your audience? Jonathan, do you want to go ahead and share some of those ideas?
Yeah, so not necessarily gamification, but I think just really using the built-in features of scheduling pop-up notifications, emails, have really helped us plan our time and also invest our time better. Like we can be constantly sending our games, our trivias during the event, but we can set them up before the event even starts. In this case, we do this like a month before. And so it does like a dual thing for us. Sends out the information about our gamification, but it gives people a reminder about the sessions, because we included in that, right? Like, here's the new trivia. Don't forget session starts at blah, blah, blah. And so we just always connect things. And like I said, most of our work is always relevant to what we're doing. So we don't do anything, even if it's a creative gamification idea, without plugging in the work, without plugging in the sessions, the event dates. And so that has been really, really helpful for us to keep consistent attendance throughout an event.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing here, Jonathan. And Amy, any additional things that you would like to mention for this question?
Like Jonathan, the push notifications definitely help keep reminding people to be engaged. We also, as I mentioned before, try to do a lot of announcements from the main stage. So when we do our housekeeping notes, to the audience before like a keynote starts, we just remind them, hey, Jocelyn's in first place. who's gonna overtake her. You only need, 1,000 more points and you get the lead. So we really try to verbally bring it up during the event so that it's not something you have to always like check your phone for. You're kind of hearing it in both places.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that here. And then to finally close our panel discussion here, my final question to you both is, have you experienced any pushback or, probably having participants not being willing to commit to event gamification? And if you do, how do you encourage more people to join these activities? So Amy, I'm gonna go ahead and start with you first for this final question.
I don't get a lot of pushback. I think people more so were like, oh my gosh, it's about time you use this kind of app. Like, where has this been all this time? We do have a couple members that are, on the older side that aren't really great with technology. They get frustrated. So I just think sometimes you have to pull those people aside. I mean, it is very user friendly. It doesn't require a lot of, technology skill to be able to use the app. So I just think sometimes you just have to take a few minutes, show them, so here's the agenda, here's what you do. Oh, look, you want to win a prize? You can do this. Here's, put this picture, show them that. So I do find that, sort of the older folks sort of have a challenge, and they don't always. I have one gentleman, bless his heart, he wants the paper agenda and he doesn't want to look at his phone, and so, we accommodate that. But I think for the most part, people are like, you should have done this a long time ago.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Amy. And then Jonathan, what about you? What's your approach to encourage some skeptics, I would say?
Yeah, I think that has been an interesting phase for us. So we started with not having data to really make changes to our event planning. Now we have that data. Like Amy mentioned, we'll always have a couple of skeptics or people that just don't want to do it. So what we've learned and what we've decided as an organization, and I have to say as an event planner, is that we can't trifle our planning and our creativity of these events because of a very few. And it's usually one or two, honestly, and there's the same repeats. So obviously, like Amy mentioned, you take care of them with giving them a printed something, but we can do creative things. We won't stop doing creative things for 580 other people based on a very small number. So you have to move forward with your creativity and your planning because you have to serve the majority and then just address the minority who are not interested. We have seen some change of hearts because a lot of the time people are just like not being a little grumpy about games and stuff, but they do feel left out. And this is of their own making. So when they're at the event and they don't have a bingo card and they're not getting a prize, and they're like, well, next time I will participate because I love bingo or I love trivia. And I could have gotten all of those answers right. And so we've seen a couple of change of hearts from like our grumpiest attendees, which is really fabulous. And so also increasing the engagement in Whova because the games are in Whova. So that has been really gratifying and really fabulous. And we're happy that that's happening sort of very organic without us having to invest too much time and like pushing people. And we don't do any of that. We don't pressure anyone into using any of the games. We upload them as tools, as fabulous things that they can use to meet other people, to be engaged in the event, and people use them because they want to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jonathan. Love to hear how, when people start seeing that they're missing out on fun, they are like, oh, how, like this is something I caused to myself and I'm missing out. Now I want to kind of join right in, and seeing it takes something to, believe in it and then start to incorporating it well. So I love seeing that journey for you in your organization, Jonathan. And this concludes our panel discussion, and we'll now follow our schedule and start the live Q&A portion. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it with this first question. The popular question here in our Q&A section is from Gerald, and he says, have suggestions of what kind of games are most effective. So would Amy or Jonathan want to kind of chime in here to see what are some really effective gamification or games that you have in your events?
I'll just add that our trivia games, for some reason, I personally don't like trivia games, but we cater to our audience, and our audience loves trivia games. And these can be very simple set of questions that you submit to the organizer. And we can change them. So there's unlimited trivia opportunities for us. So that has been a repeat tool that we use, and it always works because there's always someone that loves the trivia game. So I will say that if you're getting started with gamification, that's a simple game you can start, and you can be as simple as doing something small within the app or something printed at the event if you do print. So that will be like one thing that you can for sure do that requires very little investment.
Awesome. Great for sharing that here. So trivia is a really effective way to get people started. And then Amy, do you have any other effective games that you incorporate?
Nothing really outside of what Jonathan's done, but he said a couple things here that I'm totally going to steal for some of my next events. So I greatly appreciate that.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And so I'm going to move on here to this next question. And then this is to see if anyone is familiar with scavenger hunts. Do you know how to put that into practice, or how do you implement that on your event planning? Would anyone like to share if they have used scavenger hunts as a form of event gamification?
I have not used them, but it's on my radar for sure.
Awesome. All right. I know passport contests could be a little bit of that scavenger hunt, getting attendees to go into the exhibitor halls, but it's a little more straightforward if you're using the Whova app. And then Jonathan, do you use scavenger hunts in your event planning?
We don't, but we are familiar on how to put one together. Again, for us, it's relevant. So we connect, we tried it once with networking. So find a specific kind of person, and so it does require a lot of effort from attendees. So I don't know that it would be like a fabulous game to try it. It requires a lot of effort putting together and a lot of effort from the attendees. And sometimes there's not enough time in between. So maybe collecting a set of pins from like sessions you've attended. And if you have them all, you win something. That's how I've seen it in other events. And it's become a pretty good trend that you might actually try, because it would encourage people to go to other sessions. You only get your pin after the session ends, and that collection gets you a prize. So that's what I've seen in other events that also use Whova.
That's really great to hear. I love that you're sharing a little bit of information, even though it's not in your events, but that you have seen in other places that you've attended to. So thank you so much for sharing that here, Jonathan. And then this next question is from Laura, and she said, we have found that we have, as it were, Whova super users who participate in games, but that most people do not. Which games get the widest participation? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to chime in here with this question.
The photo contest, I think people get very competitive in Whova. And so I would just say, it takes maybe 10-15 minutes to set that up in Whova, and it really pays the dividends, right? Like you really get a ton of engagement on that. It's the one that does the most for you. So come up with a very simple photo contest. It can be anything. I would say stay away from like costume photo contests, because that can get really on the fringes of things, and you do have to monitor some of those things. But something simple like your best friend at the conference, your favorite colleague, your president and you, something like that, and it really does pay off.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing there, Jonathan. Amy, do you have anything else to add?
Agree with Jonathan. The photo contest is definitely great way to get people engaged and doesn't require a lot of effort on your part. And again, the leaderboard, I know Earl had mentioned it earlier. It's definitely a way to get, in order to get points, the attendees have to do various things to get those points. And that just sort of starts the whole organic, conversations and networking and that kind of stuff. So it's not just, a game, it's also interaction between all the attendees. So I think that's really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing here, Amy, as well. And then I know we are at the hour mark here, and I know there's some great questions left. So just to be mindful of everyone's time, I am going to be closing out with this last Q&A question I found here in our chat. This one's from Lou Ann, and she asked, what type of prizes do you offer? Do you have sponsors supply them? So I'm going to go ahead and ask this one for our guest panelists, if anyone wants to chime in. What type of prizes do you offer, and if your sponsors supply some of these as well?
Right now for us, it's something that we offer. Typically, we offer a complimentary registration to next year's event, which is quite coveted because it could be, a $1,200 prize. Sometimes, then the next level, we'll do a $100 gift card. I use this company that is, we put the dollar amount in and they can use a gift card to whatever place they choose. Amazon's also always a good one. But I think for us, the top spot is the coveted spot, because that just gives them, a significant, prize for next year. And I guess then that they're going to come back.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely shows who really likes to go to these events, and kind of, it gets everyone compelled to be like, I get free ticket for next year's event. Great, I'm gonna definitely get into the competition here. So thank you so much for sharing, Amy. And Jonathan, what about you? What are the type of prizes that you offer, and if any of your event supporters supply these?
So we're a nonprofit, so we have a few restrictions about, inherently restrictions about what we can do. So we do have a little bit of free range with gift cards, so that's our go-to. And the last 2 years, we've gotten a little more creative, and again, bringing it back to the topic and to the audience. We work with university people, so they love a book. So we are now giving like the latest and hottest sort of like higher ed related book. And we stay on top of that trend because we use them ourselves. And so we offer it for a full team. So they get 10 or 20 books, however big the team is. And that one becomes like a really good prize incentive that people really go after. And we connect it to our registration engagement strategy. Although we have repeat attendees, we open it to the full university. So whoever registers the biggest team from each university wins the set of books. And these are pretty pricey books and really fabulous content in the books. So people really want them, and people really work for them, and it works both ways for us. We get the attendees, we get the engagement, and they get the books that they were going to have to buy anyway as a university for their professional development.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing some of your prize ideas here with us, Jonathan. It's great to hear, especially from a nonprofit perspective. So I see that it's already a few minutes past the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's Event Insider session. I know we had still a few questions from our audience that were left unanswered, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time and not go over anyone's schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and end our session right now. So Amy, Jonathan, thank you again for being our guest panelists. We really appreciate you for taking the time and being here with us to share some of your insights for today's topic about event gamification. I know I got some great takeaways and some really great ideas to kind of implement in event planning. So I'm sure our audience members did as well. So to our audience, I want to thank you so much for being here with us and asking some great questions and engaging throughout in the chat throughout our panel discussion. It was a pleasure hosting this session, and I hope you had a great time learning from our guest speakers today. Thank you all once again for attending our session, and we hope you have a great, wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.